Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of moral lessons from the Quran. We will be continuing our study of Surah Bani Israil's selected passage. We have discussed two parts of that passage, and today we'll be discussing the third and final part. As you would remember, this particular passage from Surah Bani Israil is a very, very moving and a very, very impactful passage because it relates to a lot of moral directives which are to be adopted on the one hand, and also certain immoral directives which have to be abstained from. And as we had discussed earlier on, that it does seem that these are the 10 commandments of the Quran, very similar to the 10 commandments of the Old Testament or the Torah. And the way they have been described here in such a forceful way and also such a comprehensive way, you'll seldom find a group of verses dealing with all these important moral issues at one place. And so it is all the more befitting if we are able to memorize this passage, all the more befitting if we are able to turn to this passage every now and then, because it does, of course, remind us of some of the basic things that we need to do and some of the other things that we need to ignore and abstain from. So I'm just going to share my screen with you now, and we are now going to study the remaining part of this passage. So now we will be studying from verses 33 to 38, which will complete this study. So I'll read out the text and translation before you. So the words are, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا النَّفْسَ الَّتِي حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ ومن قتل مظلوما فقد جعلنا لوليه سلطانا فلا يسرف في القتل إنه كان منصورا ولا تقربوا مال اليتيم إلا بالتي هي أحسن حتى يبلغ أشده وأوفوا بالعهد إن العهد كان مسؤولا وأوفوا الكيل إذا كلتم وزنوا بالقسطاس المستقيم ذلك خير وأحسن تأويلا ولا تقف ما ليس لك به علم إن السمع والبصر والفؤاد كل أولئك كان عنه مسؤولا ولا تمشي في الأرض مرحا إنك لن تخرق الأرض ولن تبلغ الجبال طولا كل ذلك كان سيئه عند ربك مكروها ذلك مما أوحى إليك ربك من الحكمة ولا تجعل مع الله إلها آخر فتلقى في جهنم ملوما مدحورا. And do not wrongfully kill any person whose life has been held sacred by God. And remember that if someone is slain unjustly, we have given his heirs the authority. Then you should also not exceed limits in his revenge, because he has been helped. And do not approach the wealth of orphans except in a just manner until they reach maturity. And keep your promises, because you shall be held accountable for promises. And give full measure when you measure, and weigh with correct scales. This is better and fairer as the consequences are concerned. And do not go after what you know not, because eyes, ears, and heart, all of them shall be questioned. And do not walk conceitedly on the earth, because neither can you split the earth, nor can you rival in mountains in stature. The evil of each of these to your Lord is very displeasing. So, my dear participants and listeners, you can see how these verses now continue. And one of the greatest sins, or one of the major sins, which all divine scriptures regard to be an outrageous crime, is discussed, and it is said that you should not kill anyone without any basis. Of course, when it is said that without any basis, the Quran has spelled out that the only reason that you can kill any person is if he is guilty of killing, or if he is guilty of spreading anarchy and disorder. Only then do we have the right to take someone's life. And in a properly instituted state, of course, this can only be done by state authorities. No one has the right to retaliate. And if some of his friends or relatives or someone who belongs to your family is killed, you start doing this in retaliation yourself. You have to take the law. You cannot take the law in your hands. Of course, in this particular surah, which is Surah Bani Israil, we know that a state had yet to be established in the Meccan society. It is a Meccan surah, so therefore, in that particular area, there was no other option but to give the heirs of the victim this authority. And at the caution, with this caution, they are told that they must not exceed their limits. Wala yusrif fil qatl. They must not exceed their limits. Whatever the mandate is, they just should follow that mandate, and they should know that innahu kana mansura, that they have been helped by the Almighty through His directive. But obviously, this was something which belonged to the Meccan society when the state had not been formed. Other than that, whenever a state has been established, which of course is the case today everywhere, no one at all has the right to take the life of any single person by his own hands. This is the duty of the law. If someone thinks that something has been done in a way that life has to be exacted from the other person, then the matter has to be reported to a court of law, and the court of law has to take action, and justice has to take its course. And this is only how, and this is only why that this can happen. And Nida, I remind you of a very famous incident in the life of the Prophet himself, when one of his companions said that, what if I see my own wife? What if I see my own wife in a compromising situation with some other man? Should I not chop his head off? The Prophet remained silent. Once he was asked again, he again remained silent. And the third time, he slightly, in a form of anger, remarked that ana aghyaru minni wallahu aghyaru, ana aghyaru minka wallahu aghyaru minni, which means that I am more honorable, I am more esteemed than you, and God is more honorable than myself, implying the fact that even then you just cannot take any retaliative measure. It is God it is the course of law that must be adopted. So you can see that how, a person cannot be so pushed and so angry. Nothing perhaps can more anger him than to see his wife with someone in a compromising position. Even then, the Prophet has said that you just cannot take revenge from that person yourself. Even in this matter, it is the court of law that must be registered. Your case must be registered, and then the law should take its course. So we have to understand how important the Quran and Prophet Muhammad ﷺ are vis-a-vis following the law in letter and spirit. The law just cannot be taken into one's hands, and if one does, then we should remember that this would be complete chaos, complete anarchy, with everyone starting to do or starting to take revenge at their own will and their own whims. So this has been totally prohibited by the Quran. And then the verses say that what has to be done is that do not approach the wealth of orphans except in a just manner until they reach maturity. Again, this is an area which the Quran has discussed at a number of instances, and that is that if you are guardians and if you're taking care of the orphans, then do not use their wealth in order to take advantage of them. Of course, when they reach maturity, you must return them. And while you are looking after them, yes, so your essential expense can be taken. The essential needs that require expenses, of course, this is something that can be done, but it should not be the fact, as has been mentioned elsewhere in the Quran, that you start spending that money thinking that it should be consumed as soon as possible before they reach maturity, and it has to be handed over to them. So the Quran says that if you are guardians of orphans, then do not approach their wealth in this way. And always make this a point that as soon as they reach their mental maturity, in which they are in a position to look after their own wealth, then just consign it to them. Remember, it is a trust to you. It has been entrusted to you. It doesn't belong to you. And orphans, of course, they are the weakest sections of a society. And if something belongs to them, then it has to be returned to them as soon as circumstances are such. The Quran then goes on to say that awful ahd, that you have to complete your promises, you have to fulfill your promises. Awfu bil ahd, innal ahda kana mas'ula. So whenever you make a promise, you must fulfill it, because remember, you shall be held accountable for promises that you make. And I dare say that the word promise is something which is over and above. When we say something that we'll do some errand or some task, or make some commitment, but for a believer, even giving one's word and saying that he will do something is enough of a promise. It is tantamount to a promise. So whenever we make a commitment, in the first place, we must realize that any commitment that might be beyond our reach, or it seems that it is beyond our reach, it must never be made in the first place about something that we already know. But when we make a commitment, we have to fulfill it come what may. At times, even fulfill it at the cost of a lot of things. You might lose some wealth, you might lose some other things that might belong to you in order to fulfill that commitment. But this is what the Quran says. And obviously, there are instances or exceptions in which a person is not able to fulfill commitment genuinely because of some very legitimate reason. So, of course, in this case, that reason has to be presented, and if the other party considers it to be a genuine reason, then of course some concession might be given. But other than that, making a promise, keeping one's promises, whether they are understood, of course, understood promises are ones which are not written. For example, our promise that we would be obedient and we would be affectionate. Obedience here, of course, refers to the affection towards the rights of parents. If this is something which is understood, then remember, this is also an equal promise, although this is nothing which is given in writing. But as we know that there are certain promises which are given in writing, or they are given orally, and there are other promises which are understood. So in all these cases, we have to stand by our word and realize that this is something of a very essential responsibility that we need to do. وأوفوا الكيل إذا كلتم وزنوا بالقسطاس المستقيم ذلك خير وأحسن تأويلا. And give full measure when you measure, and weigh with correct scales. So remember, the rural society of Arabia was one in which, of course, people would trade, they would sell goods, and this was something which was very common. In our urban societies, this is something which might not be that common amongst communities. But remember, in the Arabian Peninsula, this was a very common way of earning and a common livelihood that people would follow. So they are being told that you must not defraud people who are your consumers, who come to buy. You should weigh with equal scales. You should not defraud them in any way, because any money or any currency or any benefit that you gain by giving less than what was committed is absolutely prohibited. It is absolutely illegal. And if one does so, then one has to realize that this is the money which has been illfully earned and wrongfully earned, and this would be a means of great embarrassment and shame when we face the Almighty. It says that وَلَا تَقْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ إِنَّ السَّمْعَ وَالْبَصَرَ وَالْفُؤَادَ كُلُّ أُولَٰئِكَ كَانَ عَنْهُ مَسْئُولًا. And do not go after things which you do not know. You see, what happens is that we speculate, we pry, we try to be curious and inquisitive, especially to find out some faults of people, to find out defects. And this makes us individuals, because we think that we are superior, and this gives us a certain pleasure. So God says, "La taqfu ma laysa laka bihi ilm." Don't go after things which you do not know. And again, this of course means that if someone asks you something about something which you maybe do not know, or you have very partial knowledge of, do not go and reply as if you were a person who was an expert in that subject. So do not go after things which are beyond the scope of your faculties, something which are beyond you. Don't go after hearsay. Don't go after half-cooked things. You have to base your actions on things which are absolutely certain, which are absolutely verifiable, so that this is something when you do, you are able to answer the other person as well if you are held accountable, or if there is a dispute which might arise. So, la taqfu ma laysa laka bihi ilm. And this Quran says, Inna sam'a wal basara wal fu'ada kullu ulaika kana anhu mas'ula, because your own faculties, whether it is the faculty of listening or hearing or your thinking, these are going to be held accountable before the Almighty. Because when you say some things, or when you go after things that are not in your knowledge, then remember the source of these things is either your faculty of sight or your faculty of hearing, and again your own faculty in which you think about things which you have little knowledge of and then express as if you were a master of that thing. So God says, don't ever attempt that, because all of these faculties shall one day be called to account. These faculties will bear witness, and these faculties will it will put us to shame by telling us that, look, this person, how he misused us, and at times went after things which were absolutely beyond the circle of his of these faculties. ولا تمشي في الأرض مرحا إنك لن تخرق الأرض ولن تبلغ الجبال طولا. And do not walk conceitedly on the earth, because neither can you split the earth, nor can you rival mountains in stature. So this is something which is very, very important for us to know, that arrogance is something which is very despicable. The Almighty does not like this arrogance. We have been created as human beings, as simple human beings who can err, who can falter, who can make mistakes, and we have to realize that we are nothing before the Almighty. And there are so many traits in which we fall well short of so many other people who are well equipped in those traits. So every person has a person above him with more pronounced traits. And in order to make ourselves, or in order to cut ourselves to our size, the best thing is to realize our follies, to always make a mental note that this is where I fall short. Because if you keep an eye on your shortcomings, this will check that arrogance, because arrogance always arises on the basis of false estimations about oneself. And if you have a realistic view of the shortcomings and mistakes that you might have, then this will keep that arrogance in check. So the Almighty says, "Lan takhriq al-jibala tula, wa la tamshi fil ardi maraha." Don't walk arrogantly on this earth. Walk as humble servants of the Almighty, because this is only befitting for people who have been created by the Almighty in this way. And it says, "Kullu zalika kana sayyuhu 'inda rabbika makruha." So evil of each of these things before your God is extremely displeasing. So after enumerating all these things, all these evils, like weighing, or I'm not following your promises, or not weighing properly, or unjustly killing people, going after the wealth of orphans, and previously we've discussed so many other things like adultery, like, for example, disobeying or treating our parents in a way that is absolutely impertinent. So after enumerating all these things, the Quran says that the evil of all these things is something which is despicable, and they must be abstained from. So this passage, as I said earlier on, is a very forceful passage. I would say one of the probably most forceful passages of the Quran, in which these moral attributes and some of the immoral things that we have to abstain from, they are all mentioned in one place, so that we are able to constantly have recourse to it and be reminded through it. And especially in this holy month of Ramadan, try our best to overcome these small mistakes and faults, which at times, of course, they grow in stature as well. And at the same time, be righteous individuals as much as possible. So I will end my talk here, and now I'm available for any questions that you might have.
Assalamu alaikum, First, I have a written question, and we are still waiting for the hands to be raised. If a person can't keep fast due to some disease or because of their old age, what should they do? How much they have to pay for the missing fast?
So if a person is terminally sick, which means that he can never fast, so the answer to that question is that there is a minimum thing which can be done, and there is a maximum. Both are called fidya, which means that you do something in lieu of the fast. So the minimum is that you give the amount in currency to one meal that you eat per day, and the maximum would be all the 3 meals that you eat in one day. So it's basically one day, one meal, or all the meals of one day. Because the word which the Quran has used is ta'amu miskin, and I think keeping in view the fact that people who can afford to give the currency, I mean equivalent in currency to one complete day's meal, which would of course amount to 3 meals or maybe 4, that is something which they should do. And other than that, if this is not possible, then the minimum amount is one meal per fast which is missed. And if a person is not terminally ill, and maybe the doctors advise him not to keep the fast when the month of Ramadan is there, but later on is his health is restored, then he must keep the missed fast. So this fidya is basically only for those people who are never able to keep fasts because of any medical condition.
Thank you. So it means that if you recover from your health, then you need to redo them. Thank you. Adil Qureshi, you can have your question now.
Ji Islam Dr. Sahab, hope I'm audible.
Welcome, sir. Yes,
so Doctor, I've been going through the notes that Ghamidi Sahab has done on these ayats. It looks like he's just literally labeling these commandments as this is the first commandment, this is the second commandment. I think all the way up to 10 or something. Is this an equivalent of the 10 commandments that were given to Moses, or how is he? Looks like he's just labeling these that this is the first and the second and the third. Or maybe goes all the way up to 10 or something.
The 10 commandments which were given to Moses are slightly different. I mean, there are some which overlap, but it is not precisely the same 10 which were given to Moses. But the way they have been enumerated here does show that there is another set of these 10 commandments which are given. And as I said, there are some commonalities between the 10 commandments of the Quran and the 10 commandments of the Old Testament. But they are not exactly the same.
Okay. But this is one of those places where Allah Almighty has given the Muslims 10 commandments.
Yes, this is the only place, in fact.
Oh, this is the only place.
This is the only place. If you count these commandments, it's not that the Almighty Himself has said, "Well, I'm giving you these 10 commandments." It is through a process of deduction in which, after enumerating them, Ghamidi Sahib has come to the conclusion that, well, these are 10 in number, and there is this uncanny resemblance between these 10 and the 10 which were put forth in the Old Testament.
Thank you. Rafia Khwaja, you can have your question.
Slang, Dr. Shah. Dr. Shah, I want to know about the last 10 days of Ramzan. We understand Laylatul Qadr comes on the Takrat. So should one pray a lot in the last 10 days every day, or should one pray on alternate nights because one is not sure if it's going to be the 23rd, 25th or 27th? Also, at the same time, I've heard that is it confirmed that it does come on one of these nights, or is that not even confirmed about Laylatul Qadr?
As far as Laylatul Qadr is concerned, we have no certain knowledge from God Himself. And even the Prophet himself is said that he was given knowledge of the date or the instance, but he forgot. And he said that all that he remembers is that it was either of the odd nights of the last 10 days. So this is something that which is his own knowledge, and that is why Muslims all over the globe, they make special arrangements to pray in these odd nights in order to be part of that night. But we cannot say with certainty that this night comes every year. There's nothing in the Quran which tells us that this is something which is going to occur every year. All that we know is that there are chances of it occurring in the odd nights. Whether it does or not, we just cannot be certain of. So in a way, it is also an incentive to be vigilant as much as we can in all these odd nights, and just expect and hope that you are able to witness that night.
So Shehzad, isn't it better to just pray as much as possible in the last 10 days of Ramzan every night?
Actually,
rather than
this is something that should be done all through Ramadan, because all the nights of Ramadan are blessed nights. The only thing is that Laylatul Qadr has a special significance. And we have been told in the Quran that Shahru Ramadan allazi unzila fihi al-Quran, which means that the Quran was revealed, or it began to be revealed in the month of Ramadan. And the night it began to be revealed is called the Laylatul Qadr. So obviously it is rewarding to worship God in all the nights and all the last 10 nights. But because we have been told that this night has a special effect and it's especially blessed, so if we are able to do more worship and we are able to be more attentive and more focused towards God in the odd nights of the last 10 days, it's only befitting and worthwhile that we should do so.
Thank you. Nusrat Khwaja, I can have your question now.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saab. Did we maybe miss last few ayahs in the translation?
Yes, actually, we did not miss them.
Okay.
They were omitted deliberately because the part which I intended to cover was which the translation had already made. So the Arabic text was actually it was beyond the I mean, it was something over and above.
Got it. My question was about 10 commandments in Quran. I mean, where are they located?
Precisely in this passage of Surah Bani Israil, if you count those commandments, they will come out to be 10. Remember, there are two types of commandments. One is to adopt certain things, and one is to abstain from certain things. So if you count the ones that you need to adopt, they come out to be 10.
I see. The other comment I had was this, and give full measure when you measure and weigh with correct scales. I think, is it okay to limit it to the weighing only, or it should be extended to everything we do in life? Because whatever we commit, for example, we commit to work 8 hours a day, and so we have to fulfill those promises or those commitments. So can we expand this or no?
Yes, of course, the promise part can be expanded to all of that, but weighing and measuring, it especially refers to the weighing and measuring that we do in the marketplace. So remember, there are two things which are mentioned there. One is to fulfill your promises, and this is it has a very wide connotation. It would include all your commitments, like the one that you would be vigilant in your duty hours, and these are the hours that you have to follow. So that would have a very extensive range. But weighing properly and giving full measure, this especially relates to our market place, and it relates to business, to traders especially who sell goods and products on the basis of their weight and their measure. So they are told that this is something which is of great dishonesty if your scales reflect something other than what actually is the weight or measure of the thing that you are selling.
Can you apply it to somebody a worker, for example, who I hire to do something and he does not do the 100% job?
I think that would come under the earlier part, which says that
promises.
Yes, promises. That you fulfill your promises. So if you've hired a worker and you've given him a certain assignment which is time barred, this is like a commitment that he has made with you. So if he doesn't follow that commitment, then he would be guilty of breaching that promise.
Thank you. Dania, you may ask a question now.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saab. My question is with respect to today's session, that how to behave when we have some cultural norms as well. I mean, while living this culture of Pakistan, if you show generosity, humbleness, or kind attitude, you are taken just for granted for many things. I mean, it's my personal experience that in Pakistan, that the more arrogance I show, the lesser are the chances for me to have a disrespectful behavior. So should following the teachings of religious values is more important at this stage, or else we have to behave in accordance with our cultural norms?
Well, What do you think is the answer? I mean, if I ask this question to you, that on the one hand, uh, our ingrained moral guidance tells us to speak the truth, and even if it entails your own interest to be sacrificed, you have to be just, even if that justice means that the people around you, they start disrespecting you. Obviously, this is what the Quran always tells us, and this is what all divine religions tell us, that you don't have to follow the culture which is based on immorality or injustice or lack of any truth. So, I mean, I think the answer is absolutely clear, that you have to follow your own conscience, and your own conscience is in line with what our scriptures tell us, and our conscience tells us that come what may, we have to uphold the voice of the truth and do it in a way that, of course, is befitting. Unless, of course, there are exceptions. We know that there are exceptions. At times, it is something which is life-threatening, or something which is so dangerous, or maybe so extreme that at times you might need to create an exception by lying, or by being not following the norms. But these are very, very extreme exceptions. Other than that, it is absolutely clear in all divine scriptures that you have to follow the voice of your conscience, and the Quran asks you nothing more.
Adil Qureshi, can I have your question?
This question is regarding yesterday's talk, where it said "Wala taqrabu zina." And I think the argument is the law that you presented against that was the protection of family system, and how the Deen wants this to be protected in such a way that adultery is the one that sort of obviously it goes against the family system. But isn't that argument a little bit weak? What if somebody says that, okay, I am not yet married, I'm not planning on getting married for a very long time, and the person who I wants to commit this act with is also not planning on getting or making their own family anytime. So what would be what's the harm in me committing adultery with that person then? So is it that only it's haram for the person who's marrying or already married? Obviously, it is haram for every man and woman, whether they are married or unmarried. But why does this argument come that it sort of is there to protect the family system?
Well, but this is because in general circumstances, I mean, 9 out of 10 times people end up marrying. There are exceptions that people don't marry, but if you count them, if you have some statistics about them, you'll find that this is something of a very small number who doesn't tend to get married. Now, even if those who don't tend to get married, if they are looked upon, you see, protecting the family system is one thing, and spreading lewdness in the societies, spreading norms which are against the family system, in spite of the fact that you might not be willing to produce a family, but of course you would be doing something which would set examples for other people, or which would create disorder in other people. It would create out of wedlock situations in which the responsibility between the couples regarding a child, whether he is born or not born, will be brought into question. And then again, of course, these temporary relations, they don't last. You keep changing partners, and when you change partners and you keep on doing so, the stability which is needed for every person to be looked after by one spouse, it is sacrificed. So do remember that Quran actually talks about general situations in most cases. And specifically here, we know that this family life is something which is 9 out of 10 times to be followed by all. But for the exceptional case, as I said, there are other harms which I just enumerated. And this is something which it has to be realized, that in the absence of any marriage, the amount of promiscuity which is going to spread into society, how prostitution would be given air as a result, because of course this would become a legitimate excuse for people that, well, we're not going to get married, and all that we're going to do is have these relations with prostitutes. So you see, in spite of the fact that some people might decide not to get married, but the chaos and the anarchy which would be produced in a society as a result would be that it would induce people to give up this institution of marriage slowly or gradually, as you can see has happened in the Western society, that people have virtually lost faith in this institution, which was meant for their betterment. And now they seldom get married, and they think, well, what is the use of getting married? Because whatever marriage entails, we already benefit from that without even getting married. And as a result, we find people, because they are not brought up in the proper mindset, because at times we have single parents as a result of such an attitude. The child suffers a lot. The child needs both men, both a father and a mother, and at times, at times is an understatement. At all times, I would say this is not available to them. And these children, of course, then they become psychologically handicapped. And then there's also this question of responsibilities, that who's going to be responsible in such cases. People do make this vow that, well, we'll not produce children, but remember that this again is against the scheme of the Almighty. So you see, there are a number of things which as a result of that, even if you don't get married, which have a very negative impact on the whole society.
All right, thank you. Nusrat Khwaja, I can have your question now.
Yeah, Dr. I was just looking about abortion. I understood when you said yesterday that 120 days is the limit. But some other scholars were talking about like 40 days. And I was not sure which is correct, because what they are saying is the 3 stages of development, they can go concurrently at the same time. So 40 days, taking 40, yeah, okay.
Exception. Otherwise, as far as the 4 schools of thought are concerned, you'll find that almost all jurists, they are unanimous to this on this conclusion. If there is this 40-year view which has arisen, I have yet to read about it. And also, I think that it is against the Quran, because the way the Quran spells out those stages, if you read Surah Mu'minun and Surah Hajj, the initial verses, they describe the stages of a fetus. And the manner in which they describe those stages is is something which is very close to the days which we had just discussed yesterday, that they amount to 120. And medical science does seem to corroborate that the final stage, just before which the soul is blown into that organic mass, these various stages which fast, like the muzgha, the alaqa, etc., they all run in a way that they are not concurrent. They are one after the other.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Dr. Suhail, you can ask your question now.
Dr. Saleem, assalamu alaikum. Thank you for another very good talk. My question today is about the states of purity and impurity as indoctrinated by religious scriptures. Especially, I want to bring your attention to 2 states of impurity that have been actually ingrained in all of the theists throughout the world. First is the state of impurity of a woman who is having her periods. And second is the state of impurity after a sexual intercourse, both for a man and a woman. Now, these are not new concepts. For some reason, they have been promulgated from one religion to another throughout centuries. Even if you go back as far as some of the Sanskrit scriptures and the hymns that are in the Vedas, they'll tell you that the rishis, which were their priests at that time, weren't allowed to sing those hymns if they had just done a sexual intercourse. And this is even before the Jews and the Torah. And that has come down all the way through the last 3,000 years, right up to the last religion, which is ours. And my question is obviously regarding Islam, is the necessity to have a shower or a bath after sexual intercourse. Now, it confuses me because on one side, we talk about the values of family and the sanctity of sex, and sex being the tool that we use to create families upon which all our culture and religion is based. And on the other hand, if we consider sexual intercourse to be a state of impurity, after which we have to have a bath or a shower, otherwise we can't do even a one in our salah. Compare that to the acts of defecation or urination, after which are much more hygienically, scientifically, much more impure than sexual intercourse. But we are not, it's not mandated that we have to take a shower after defecation or urination, but after sexual intercourse. What is the rationale behind it? Why do I have to take a shower after sexual intercourse?
I think the answer to this question can be understood if you view the fact that there are certain areas in human interaction or human behavior regarding which only God can tell us what the right course is. Just to give you an example, why is it that we pray 5 times a day? It could have been 4, it could have been 3, it could have been 7. This is something which only God thought that the number 5 is the one which is appropriate for our own taskiyah, for the purpose for which all these directives are given. Similarly, why should we fast for 1 month? We could have done so for 15 days, maybe for 2 months. Similarly, why should we give zakat on wealth to be 2.5%? It could have been less, it could have been more. So to the point that I'm making is that there are certain things about which the level of taskiyah is the ultimate objective of all directives of religion. So human intellect on its own is not able to detect that. So we would never on our own could have come to know that we need 5 prayers, or that the first rakat of each prayer should be either 2 or 4 or 3 or whatever. We needed this divine intervention to tell us what is the optimum to do in order to gain taskiyah. So if this is understood, then I can relate it to your question as well, that the amount of taskiyah for which certain actions have been prescribed, like for example, defecation or urination only requires wuzu, whereas whereas sexual intercourse or any such state of a person requires to be bathed. Is it again something, the extent of taskiyah is something that we could not have gauged ourselves. So I understand all these things by making this sense that there are certain levels of taskiyah or the extent of taskiyah which as human beings we could not have rationalized or rationally discovered. We are absolutely dependent on them for God. I mean, it is just the same way that we just cannot say that, well, 1% zakat is enough, or if I pray 1 time a day, it's enough. I had no source to take that decision. So I think that on a very similar note, there are certain other directives of the Sharia about which certain optimum acts or practices have been prescribed. And it is to understand them would mean that the Almighty thinks that the amount of taskiyah which would result as a consequence would be the optimum if for example in defecation just wuzu is done, and in the case of sexual intercourse shower has to be taken.
Okay, Dr. Saleem, thank you. I appreciate that you have given me a fair enough straightforward answer. It's basically faith-based.
We don't have any basis. I mean, just ask yourselves that why are we not prescribed 6 prayers? And I don't think anything that would come to my mind, because it is here that I have to accept God, trusting Him that this is the optimum way of doing taskiyah. Remember, the information that we have is all our religious directives. The purpose of those directives is taskiyah, which means purification of the soul. So, especially in these worship rituals, they are the best examples that can make us understand that on our own we would never have been able to discover what is the optimum amount of worship that would be that optimum taskiyah that we need. So on a very similar basis, I would say, to give you another example, the paring of nails. So we have been prescribed that we should cut our nails, whether women or men, both. Now, someone could have made a case that why is it that we must cut our nails? Because if hygiene is the case, we can always clean our nails. It's always, I mean, you just can go and clean them. It's easy. So why is it that God wants us not to even have them grown? So you just cannot say that, well, I mean, it could have been the same. So what comes to my mind is that, again, by cutting those nails and instead of cleaning them, because both would have ultimately resulted in the same action, that they would have remained cleaned. The optimum amount of tazkiyah which the Almighty requires of us would not have resulted. So Sharia has to be understood on this basis, that there are certain things which about which God will tell us the optimum level or extent.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. I think there comes a point where you just have to say to yourself, take it or leave it. You just have to accept it if you want to accept the creed or the doctrine, and there's no other explanation. Thank you very much.
Actually, this is one of the reasons that we are human beings. I mean, this is where we fall short of that knowledge of what we call revelation. I mean, there are so many things. I would say 80% or 90% of the things that we have innately. I mean, we have the knowledge. We don't need any person. But the 10% or the 15% that we don't have are precisely these things, because our intellect, the mind that we have, it doesn't have the wherewithal. It doesn't have the force, I would say, or intelligence to get to reach the right path in those cases.
I suppose that's one way of looking at it. But yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
We have reached the end of the program. Thank you.
Okay, inshallah, tomorrow.